Hello, welcome to Anime Expo Lite. So great to see everyone. We have a very special event for you today. This is Understanding Your Right as an Artist, presented by Project Anime. And we have a special guest today, our very own ace attorney, step aside Phoenix Wright, Mr. Gamal Hennessy. So welcome. So Gamal, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Oh,
What do you do?
sure. I am a comic book lawyer. I have been practicing law in the comic book industry since about 1998. I've worked for both very large companies like Amazon and Marvel, and for individual creators, whether they're artists or writers or people trying to build their own publishing company around comics. And I've been doing that, like I said, for probably more than 20 years now.
Unbelievable, comic book lawyer.
Mhm.
Our very own She-Hulk, only very own Man Murdock. How many more cliches can I throw it out there? Let me ask a follow-up question. How did you? You know what? Let me rephrase. Not how you got into this business. Also, I'd like to hear that. But I think I would like to hear what kind of training and education was necessary for you to specialize with comics and art.
Okay, well, the training, I'll start with the training first because that's more formal. How I got into it is much less formal. So let's start with the formal part first. For anyone who wants to actually get into this specific area of the law, there's basically three pillars you have to understand. The first is contract law specifically, because a lot of the relationships, whether it's between creative people to make a book or between publishers and creators to publish a book, or is between publishers and film studios or anyone else who wants to turn that property into something else, you're going to actually have to understand what's in the contract, what you are getting, what you are giving away, and how the language can be manipulated to actually get people where they want to go. So that's the first piece. The second piece is understanding the fundamentals of intellectual property law, specifically contracts and trademarks. Not so much patents or trade secrets, because those are the other two major parts of intellectual property, but because copyrights and trademarks are the fundamental assets, the fundamental resources of comics and manga. That's what you need to actually understand in terms of how the law works and how that law actually influences the contracts. The third piece is entertainment law, because a lot of the contractual relationships are based on fundamentals of entertainment law, whether you're talking about the services agreements that studios might use to have someone come in and do work, distribution agreements that people use to have certain material sent out into the market. Understanding those relationships have a lot to do with getting comics out into the world. And the last piece is publishing law, which is a specific subsection of entertainment law, dealing primarily with books, magazines, now, ebooks, digital manga, things like that. So once you understand those four pieces, then it is much easier for you to kind of get involved in comic book law, even from a ground level, which is how I actually got involved. I was reading a lot of comic books and manga in law school, which I probably should not have been doing. Um, but when I was doing that, a colleague of mine who had been offered a job in a anime and manga company,
Oh yeah,
who couldn't actually take the job because she already had other commitments. She said, "I know exactly the person who should take this job." So she called me up and said, "Go to this place, talk to this person. He's going to give you a job." And I actually did not really know what it was that I was getting into. I just knew that I had to pay off all the law school loans. So if someone was going to give me a job, I should probably take the job. And so my first real job out of law school was as the business affairs counsel and then general counsel for a anime company called Central Park Media.
oh
So I worked,
yeah,
yeah.
of course.
I worked for Central Park Media from, oh, wow, 98 to 2004.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
During like that, the last major period where they were distributing material. And then after that, I went straight from Central Park Media to Marvel Comics, where I was the international publishing manager there. And the primary job was to take all of the English language comics and create business relationships in other countries. You would just send those comics to the licensing partners. They would put them in the local languages, and then they would distribute those comics, in their own countries or in whatever territory they had licensed, much in the same way that a lot of manga companies in Japan will then license material to be released in other countries, including the United States. So I did that for a few years and quite a bit of other stuff in terms of their licensing and films and employee agreements. But once I left that company, I realized that there was not a lot of independent lawyers who are willing to work with clients in the comic book industry. There were a lot of artists and there were a lot of writers who wanted to get into comics, but they didn't really understand the contracts. They didn't really understand how the business worked. So I set up my own practice specifically to help them so they would have at least somewhere to go to help someone explain what they were getting into in terms of contracts and things. And as the business itself and technology changed, it gave more and more people the ability to make their own comics. My practice changed. So now a lot of the people that I'm working with are developing their own intellectual property. They're starting their own companies. They're doing having their own distribution channels, either through Kickstarter or through traditional business channels, to get more and more material out into the world. So it's not just the major companies anymore. Really, the internet and digital technology has allowed anyone to actually get into the business now. It's much easier to get into the business now than it's ever been.
That's great. So I think for our audience,
Mhm.
one question I know that they want to know is how can an artist protect their work? What should they know about?
Okay, well, the first thing, once you actually understand that the work you created is in fact your work, because that is the fundamental question. A lot of times people are creating art that they do not necessarily own, whether they're making art based on other characters that are owned by other companies, or they're making art that is essentially a work for hire situation. Like they're basically a contractor and they're making the art for someone else, whether they realize it or not. Once you understand that the art is yours, there's three basic steps that you need to take to protect your art. The first one is you have to memorialize the fact that you are in fact the owner. And you do that by, in terms of art and stories and comics, or books in general, you register the copyright with the Copyright Office in the United States. It is a fairly straightforward process, a process that you don't really even need a lawyer for, and it's also a fairly inexpensive process. To file a copyright online is about $65. Once you do that, and you have established the fact that you own that particular copyright, the next thing you need to do is whenever you are working with anyone, um, has anything to do with your art, there has to be a contract. And the contract has to actually clearly state that you retain ownership of the artwork if that is part of the deal. Now, in some deals, you actually give up the ownership of the copyright because you're being paid to give that up. But if you're not, then the contract needs to clearly state, anyone you work with, the contract needs to clearly state that you retain ownership of the copyright. And the third thing is you have to monitor and enforce your ownership of the copyright. So if you see your art on another site, or if you see someone using your art on like t-shirts or posters or something like that, or any place, you have to actually be able to get a lawyer or someone else to send them a cease and desist letter, or what's called the DMCA takedown notice if it's online, so that whoever's infringing on your copyright or using your work without permission, you actually get them to take it down. And once you have those three steps, you're in a much better place to like protect your work from people who will use it without permission.
Sorry, DMCA. What does that stand for?
It stands for the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Basically,
Okay.
every major internet service provider or internet platform needs to have a policy in place where infringing work, they have some mechanism to delete it or take it down or remove it. And there's a very formal process that you look on any website like um, Facebook or ArtStation or anything like that. If there's a, you can look in their terms and conditions and they'll have language about the DMCA notice. So you could use that and you'll contact them directly and say, this person or this group is using my art without permission. You also have to prove that it's your art when you make that statement. And then you go through the process and they have the art taken down.
No, that's very helpful. There's a lot to unpack there. This is so cool. I mean, this is by far the funnest legal panel I've ever been to. So you
We
come to
try
the
to
right
make it
place.
fun. Yeah, we
Yeah,
try
and
to
I
make
want
it
to
fun.
go back to something you said about the three pillar about, that you're the owner, get the copyright.
Mhm.
I want to go back to copyright. What is the difference between a copyright and a trademark?
Okay. A copyright and a trademark, the basic idea is the trademark protects the image and the copyright protects the story. So let's say I tell you I wrote a story about a very rich young man who who survives a tragic criminal event and then uses his money to get the skills and technology to fight crime outside the law as a vigilante. That's a story. It's not the most original story in the world, but it's a story. And that story you could actually file with the Copyright Office, along with the whatever images, whatever art is associated with that story. But let's say now, whoever makes that story decides to take the symbol for that story. And let's just say for this story, let's say it's a bat, and put that on a T-shirt. The art, the actual image of the bat symbol put on a T-shirt, like your T-shirt that you're wearing right now, that is a trademark because trademarks actually protect the public in terms of goods and services sold. Because what the government is attempting to do is make sure that there is no confusion. So if you started selling, let's say, Coca-Cola orange juice, the public might think that that's actually coming from the people who make Coca-Cola, even if it's not. So Coca-Cola now has the right to tell you to stop selling Coca-Cola orange juice because they have the copyright for Coca-Cola. And the more goods that are out in the world, especially if you're talking about a artist who's making comics and then uses the popularity of those comics to make t-shirts and posters and things like that, all of those different goods you want to actually protect with your trademark. So whatever logo you're using, whatever image you're using, that's when you go and get a trademark. But that usually comes later. The story and the art for the story is what you actually file a copyright for. Like I said, a copyright is easy to file online. You don't need a lawyer. You need $65 and whatever artwork you have. The trademark is a much longer process and it's a much more involved process. So you almost always need a lawyer for that. And that process takes about a year to do, even if you have a lawyer. So usually I tell my clients, don't worry about the trademark until after you have 2 or 3 issues of your comic or right before you're planning on doing any kind of licensing or distribution or making merchandise. Then worry about the trademark because at least then you have a stream of revenue to actually pay for these fees and everything else. A lot of times when independent artists are making their own comic, they're trying to save money wherever they can. So I tell them the copyright, you don't want to wait too long. You want to file that as soon as you have the script and the character design, you can file a copyright. But the trademark, you can wait until you're actually you have more of an established catalog or a title and then file a trademark then.
That's the best explanation I've ever heard. I want to drill down copyright a little bit more because I really feel like this will apply to just about every artist that is watching this panel.
Mhm.
So you mentioned that the process itself is not difficult. You go online. Can you
Mm,
just elaborate that a little bit more? And
sure.
to add, are there any definitely do's and don'ts? It's like,
Um,
please don't do that, or please make sure you do this.
yes, I will. I will try to walk through the entire copyright process from memory. Hopefully, I can do it. The first thing that when you sign in and you create an account and everything like that, it'll ask you to register, file a new application, file a new registration. And once you click on that, it'll ask you um, what type of copyright you're creating, because there are like 7 or 8 different types. There's literary work, there's computer program, there's sculpture, there's photographs. Most of the time, if you're making comics, there's you can make one of two selections. You could say it's a visual work. So because let's say you only have the character designs for your character, you haven't really made the comic yet. You only have the character design. You can register the character designs for your character as a work of visual art, and then just follow that menu. If you already have a full issue of the comic, you could file it as a literary work, like a book or a comic or anything else. File that, and keep in mind when you're filing it, your comic doesn't have to actually be released yet. You can file a copyright before the book is released, so that you know that it's protected even before it actually hits the shelves. The next thing that they're going to ask is they're going to ask for the name of the book. They're going to ask for if was it already published, and if it was published, they'll ask when it was published. They will ask who the actual owner of the work is, and in this point, if you are actually sharing the copyright with someone, you have to list every person who is actually owning the piece of the copyright. If it's one company, then that company will put its name
Hmm.
for the copyright. And the next thing that we'll ask is, was this work done as a work for hire? Now, if this is your book that you made, the answer to that question is no.
Hmm.
But when any company files a copyright, they're going to actually say yes, because Marvel or Aftershock or Viz or anybody else, they bring in people, freelance artists and writers, to do the
Hmm.
work, and then they own the work. So, but they have to say that in the copyright form. Then they ask, where should they mail the copyright? Because you actually get a piece of paper that says you have a copyright. They ask, who should be contacted if somebody wants to kind of license the rights to your copyright. They ask
Hmm.
who should be contacted. They ask who should be contacted if there's questions about the copyright application. So when I do copyright applications for my clients, because I do have some clients, because they have so many copyrights,
Yeah.
they don't want to do them, so they make me do it, which is fine. But they don't. I'm saying you don't need to. But if you don't want to do it yourself, you can pay me to do it. I'll do it. It's fine. Um, and then they ask a couple more questions about, are you claiming the artwork? Are you claiming the actual text? Is there anything that you're not claiming in the copyright? Because let's say in your story, you actually use a poem from another writer.
Hmm.
It's not yours, but you got permission to use it. Then you could actually say, okay, all of the text in the comic is mine, except this piece. It's not mine, and you let them know that. And then they ask you to pay the $65. You could pay that
Hmm.
through a credit card or check or whatever. And then because it's an online application, they'll ask you to upload, usually it's a PDF, to their system.
Mm.
Once you upload the PDF, you press one more button, and it'll say in your account, it'll say that file is pending. And usually about 2, 3 months later, you get the copyright in the mail, and you're good to go. The copyright actually lasts for the life of the owner. Well, if you're an individual, it's a life of the owner plus 70 years. So if I filed the copyrights today, and it's
Okay.
2021, and let's say I lived, just to keep the numbers simple, and I lived till 2030,
Uh-huh.
well, then the copyright for my book, like this book that I wrote right here, would last until 2200. No, I'm sorry,
70 years.
2100. Yes,
Right,
70
right.
years. So 2100.
After death.
70 years after death.
What is death? That's a different panel. Don't answer
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Don't answer that.
I don't have the credentials for that.
Come on, we're in anime comics world here. I want to just follow this train of thought. So let's say an artist had done all that, had done a contract, which I'll come back to, had done the copyright, et cetera, and then this artist, going back to your three pillar, the third one, which was monitor and enforce, finds out that someone has stolen their art.
Okay, then what you
What are some of
need
the options? Yeah.
what you need to do there is you need to actually track down who the individual is in terms of where they are, what they're doing, and gather as much information as possible. Then the next step is usually to contact a law firm that handles entertainment law, intellectual property, and litigation. And that's the other important piece, because what you're going to need to do is present the information to your attorney and say, they are infringing on the rights to my stuff. And you and your attorney can work together to determine two key factors. One, can you actually enforce? How hard is it for you to enforce the copyright? And two, what is your potential for recovery? Because in the age of the internet, let's say I find out that someone infringed on my copyright, but the person happens to be in Indonesia.
Okay.
Well, okay. The cost of actually enforcing that, especially if they're doing commercial goods, like if they're doing t-shirts and toys and things like that, and it's in Indonesia, the cost of actually hiring an attorney here in the States, who's then going to find a corresponding attorney in Indonesia, and then go through the process of finding that group or individual, because it could just be someone who pulled the image offline and is selling the t-shirts in some market in Indonesia. The actual cost of that might be so high that you can't afford to enforce your rights, even though the rights are there. The other thing you have to actually keep in mind is when you're going after someone, they may or may not be in a position they may not be generating any money from it, and they may not have any money. So it's not the financial realities and the legal realities might actually not match. You might come to the conclusion that you could enforce your rights, but enforcing your rights would cost so much that it's not worth the effort to do so.
Yeah.
If you do decide to go the route of enforcing your rights, then your attorney would send what's called a cease and desist letter, which basically lays out, I own the rights to this thing. You are using this thing without permission, and I am asking you to stop using the thing. If you do not stop using the thing, then I will attempt to take the next step, which is, file a lawsuit against you for infringement. Now, if it's a large company that has deep pockets that's infringing your rights, this is something that could be potentially very helpful to you, because one of the ways to resolve the situation is the company that's doing the infringing can just get a license from you. Say, okay, well, we used your image to sell these t-shirts. Well, we're selling like 50,000 t-shirts a year. How about we just make a deal so that you can get some money for the t-shirts? And then you go, oh, well, that's fine. You should have done that in the first place. But yes, we can then make a deal. Or you could actually go to court, and because you have the copyright and you could actually prove that it's yours, you can get damages that include the cost of the litigation and triple the amount of whatever it was that they made from infringing your rights. So it is not a easy process to go through, and I don't do litigation, so people can't contact me for that. But if you do actually succeed, the benefit to actually protecting your rights can be substantial, depending on the scenario.
Thank you. That's great. I was recently listening to a podcast about this exact scenario.
Mm-hmm.
He was an independent fashion designer in LA,
Mm-hmm.
and she's been successfully selling her design. And then, not name, a major multinational fashion corporation literally stole her design, and
Mm-hmm.
she spent years litigating it, but she won, and
Exactly.
which is a great story. Um, we're about halfway through, which is great. Before I move on to the next question and sort of change tracks a little bit, I want to just, for anyone that's just joining us, you're at Animal Expo Lite, and this panel is the Understanding Your Right as an Artist, presented by Project Anime, and we have our special guest, our very own eighth attorney, Mr. Gamal Hennessy, which we're very, very happy. He is a professional comic book lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, kids, that is a real job. And if you missed
Yes,
it
it is.
earlier, he got this job by reading comic books in law school. That's what
Mm-hmm.
it takes. You have to read a lot of manga and read a lot of webtoon and read a lot of comic book. That's how you become a lawyer. Tell your mom I said that. Um, I want to switch track a little bit to the exciting world of contracts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask a stupid question. What
Yes.
is a contract?
A contract is a legal agreement between two or more parties for the exchange of some sort of consideration, which means either goods or services or actions or not actions. In the world of comics and manga, a contract is used uh, in several different instances. For example, if you're making a comic with someone else, like you're the artist and someone else is the writer, you make a contract to actually determine who owns that potentially valuable intellectual property that you're creating, who is going to actually do what in terms of making sure the book gets made, who is actually going to pay whatever needs to be paid to get the book made, and who is going to own, or who is going to get the revenue
Mm,
if and when the book actually makes money. Because it is one thing because a lot of clients of mine who, before they come to me, they say, well, we're just going to split the profits 50-50. I said, well, okay, that's great and that's simple, but that's not everything that goes into that contract. Like I said, we have to figure out who is going to do what. What happens if one of you can't do what it is that you're supposed to do? Who's going to pay the upfront costs? How are you going to deal with like publicity and confidentiality and all the things that artists don't necessarily want to think about because they want to make comics. They don't want to actually have to worry about bank accounts and upfront costs and trademarks and copyrights and all these other things. So you want to get that out of the way as early as possible so that you can concentrate on doing what you really want to do, which is making the comic. The other type of agreement that is very prevalent in the creation of comics is the work for hire agreement, which
mm,
is where someone comes in and they make a comic, whether they're artist, writer, letterer, colorist, but the intellectual property rights that they create when they make that thing, they're giving to another company in
mhm,
exchange for some sort of payment. So that is how a lot of the major companies churn out books every month. Most of them do not have dedicated artists or writers on staff in the company because it doesn't make financial sense to do that. What they'll do is they will bring in artists and writers from a lot of their freelancers. The freelancers
mhm.
will all make the comics. They'll make all the art. Write the scripts. They'll do everything, and then they'll deliver that art in exchange for some money up front and sometimes some payments on the back end, which is called royalties, where you get, depending on how many copies of the book are sold, you get a percentage of that profit, depending on how big the company is and how they set up their system. So the contract is the legal agreement between whoever's making the book, so that everyone knows who has what rights, who has what responsibilities, and who gets paid what.
No, that's great. So most people, and when I say most people, I mean me. Most people don't read the contracts that they sign.
No, they don't. No, they do not.
So is there any particular part of the contract they really should pay attention to? Or you might say you really should read the entire contract, but I don't know how realistic that is. You know.
It is not realistic. But what a lot of times when my clients will bring me a contract from let's say a publisher says, I want to publish your contract, your
Hmm.
book. They will bring me the contract, and what I do is I will deconstruct and interpret the contract for them. So I will break down every paragraph into English that everyone can understand so that they know exactly what it is that they're getting into. And when you're making, especially when you're making original comics and you're working with another publisher, the thing that you have to be, the two things you have to be most clear about is what are you giving, what are you giving away, and what are you getting? Because there are a lot of cases where a artist will sign an agreement that says a publishing agreement,
Hmm.
thinking that the publisher only has the right to make the manga. But if they actually read the comic, they would realize the publisher actually took away the rights to the manga, the merchandise,
Mm.
the film rights, the TV rights, the video game rights. And so basically, the artist is left with no rights at all once they sign that contract because they
Mm.
didn't read it.
Mm.
So that's what is it that you're really giving away in these deals. The other piece is what are you getting?
Hmm.
Because if you're in a situation where in some of these contracts there is no money up front, so you're actually making a comic, giving it to the publisher. The publisher goes out and sells the comic, and you're only getting money once the comic is sold. But if you don't understand how that works, you may put yourself in a situation where you will never get any money for the book that you made because let's say they said they're going to give you 50% of the net profits from the comic,
Hmm.
and you say, okay, 50% of the
Okay.
profits, and you're like, okay, if a comic, let's say tankobon is $12, you say 50% of that is $6, so I'm getting $6, and that's
That's
not
not
what you're
profit.
that's not what you're getting. You just divided the wholesale price of the comic. So when you're looking at profit, you have to look at the term gross versus net.
Hmm.
Gross is exactly the amount that the publisher got from the sale of the comic. So let's say if they sold it through to like Barnes and Noble, they have to sell it at a discount of I think it's like 50%. So the $12 book now becomes a $6 book. And the
Hmm.
$6 book is the gross. But a lot of publishers, almost all of them, deduct other costs off the top:
Hmm.
the printing, the
Hmm.
shipping, the marketing, there could be a lot of costs.
Overhead. Yeah.
Yes, a
Right.
lot of costs baked into that. Convention sales, dinners, foot massages. You don't know what they actually put in there. So that the $3, which is the gross, once they subtract all of the actual costs, the net could be zero or less than zero.
Mm.
So you could see the book getting sold, and depending on how they've structured the contract, you may not ever get any money. So those are the two major things you have to. There's other things. There's a lot of other things to look for in the contract, but those are the two major things. What are you actually giving up, and what are you actually getting? And if you can't answer the questions when you read the contract, what are you getting? The answer is probably zero. Because if you can't figure out how you're going to get paid and when you're going to get paid, it's probably because you're not going to get paid. So one of the things that I try to work with my clients is when I break the contract down, let them know, okay, the way this is structured, this is either helping you or hurting you. And then you can decide whether or not you want to sign the contract based on the advice that I give.
No, that's great. I know that you give a lot of talks, you do a lot of panel, you
Mhm.
have published a book, which I'll come back to. Is there a question or questions that you wish people will ask, but people never ask?
The question that I think people should ask that they hardly ever ask is,
Maybe because they don't understand it, or
yeah, when should I walk away from a deal?
ooh, I like that.
Because the thing about comic books today And the thing about contracts in general is most of you would actually, if you walk into it understanding under what circumstances you would walk away, you have a much better understanding of your position in that discussion. A lot of times, especially emerging artists or aspiring artists, spend years trying to get anyone to give them a potential deal. So they're submitting their artwork, they're doing, reviews at portfolio reviews at cons, they're doing pitch meetings, they're doing all sorts of things. And literally years could go by before anyone offers them a deal.
Mm-hmm.
They get very excited about the deal that's offered to them. And then they really want to sign it because they figured if they took me 4 or 5 years to get one person
Mm-hmm.
to give them an offer, maybe they'll never get another offer, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they should take this deal. That is almost never the case for two reasons. One, there is at least 300 in North America, 300 different publishing companies. If no publisher is giving you an offer now, it could be that A, your project's not ready to be published, or B, you simply haven't found the right publisher yet. Because there's a lot of factors that go into a publisher, what they're going to decide to do in publishing a certain book. The second piece is in the 21st century, you don't necessarily need a publisher to get your book out into the world. You could not get a deal at all, publish your comic, take ownership and control of the entire process, and then know that you are the one keeping all of the profit. You are the one who has the
Mm-hmm.
total control
Mm-hmm.
of the book. That's why I wrote this particular book here. The business of independent comic book publishing is designed to give everyone the information and the confidence to look at a particular publishing deal that a publisher might give them and say, no, this isn't a good deal. I'm going to go publish my own comic.
Mm-hmm.
Because what has happened over the years is that a lot of people have signed very bad deals because they thought
Mm-hmm.
a bad deal is better than no deal at all. And that's not true. No deal is often better than a bad deal.
No deal's
Because
better. Yeah.
because if you have no deal, you still own the rights to your story. You still own the rights to the characters that you've put so much effort and emotion and love into. If you have no deal, you still have those rights. If you have a bad deal, you put the time in, you put the effort in, and someone else is actually making money off it. Someone
Mm-hmm.
else owns it. Someone else can do whatever they want with it, and you're actually in a worse position than you were if you had no deal.
Do you have a story or example of something that went horribly wrong? Either maybe you were involved, or maybe you were
Well,
not involved.
based on attorney-client confidentiality, I cannot use my own clients as examples. But there actually was a very high-profile story. I guess middle of last year. It was in an online magazine called IO9, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it was about a company. I forget the name of the company, but
All right.
basically what they were doing is they were signing up artists to do work, and then either they would send them a contract and never sign it. They would send them a contract, but then send them a contract. They would do the work. The contract would never get signed. They would never get paid. And then the publisher would call them up to force them to sign a new contract that at much worse rates and much worse terms than the original contract. And it was really too late for them to negotiate because they had already done the work and submitted the work. The payment
Wow.
terms were something along the lines of, I don't remember each of one of the payment stipulations, but the worst one was they were going to hold on to all of your page rates and all of
Mm-hmm.
your royalties until 90% of America was vaccinated against coronavirus.
Wow.
Now, if you think about that, you don't have to be a lawyer to think about that and go, that doesn't make any
What?
sense at all, because if I did a comic for you and I gave you the comic, that has nothing to do with the vaccination rates.
Right.
of a worldwide pandemic. And this was back in the spring. So we didn't know when there was going to be a vaccine. We didn't
Hmm.
know how many people were going to get it. So this company was trying to keep your revenue, your page rate, what you agreed on for potentially years. And now we know that so many people are not going to take the vaccine anyway. There could never be a time when 90% of the population is vaccinated. So why are you tying this to that? And
Wow.
yeah, so yes,
That's a crazy story. I'm gonna have to look that up. We got a few minutes left, so I think I'll leave with two more questions, if I may.
mhm,
The first one is, how do people find you? Like, what I mean is, can people find you on Twitter? Do you have a newsletter? Et cetera, et
yes.
cetera.
The easiest way to find me is on my website, and the
Okay.
website is called Creative Contract Consulting, and that's all one word. When they go to the website, if they have there's a blog that I run that has a lot of ongoing information about different
Mhm.
aspects of the comic book industry because the industry is changing all the time. I mean, even the book that I wrote last year, a lot of that, some of the stuff is that has to be updated because like the situations have changed. You can
Mhm.
find me on Facebook, it's Gamal Hennessy. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also run a group on Facebook called the Business of Comic Book Publishing.
Excellent.
There's if you go on YouTube and type in Gamal Hennessy, I will pop up in like 30 or 40 different like things very similar to this. Either in my own presentations or panels and stuff like that. So, and yeah, if you wanted to get a free consultation, like if you were working on something or you plan to release something in the future, I offer free consultations on Zoom so that we can actually talk through what it is you're planning on doing, what it is you might need, and how I might be able to help you get to where you want to go and protect yourself from a legal and business standpoint.
Fantastic. You're everywhere. Final question. Parting words. Like as we end this great panel, any final thoughts, advice, words of wisdom for our audience at Anime Expo Lite?
I would say if doing you're planning on creating manga and you want it to be more than a hobby. You want it to be like a business that can grow over time. I would say make sure that you establish the contracts and the relationships that you need legally before you start working on the comic. You
Mm,
don't want to actually be in a situation where you're halfway through the book and then there's a dispute about who is supposed to do what, who's supposed to pay for what, and then you start negotiating the contract because you've already spent months, perhaps years working on something. You want all of that to be clear up front so that you can, like I said, focus on doing what you really want to do, which is to create the artwork. And because a lot of times the worst case scenario is you go into a project, you make a book, the book does well, you actually get a lot of attention. You have a Kickstarter and you make a lot of money from the Kickstarter. Or, best case scenario, Netflix calls you. Now they want to make a show.
hmm
It's too late. It's almost too late then to go back and try to negotiate who's going to get what piece of the
Right.
streaming television revenue because now there's real money on the table.
hmm
It's much easier before any when there is no book, when it's just a blank page. Everybody involved in the book who's going to own part of it can sit down over dinner and say, okay, well, if this gets made into a Broadway show, who gets what? If this
hmm
gets made into, and this could be a very pleasurable, like, best case scenario, pie in the sky kind of discussion. Everybody will walk away very happy because they know if, you know, if Square Enix makes a video game out of it,
hmm
I'm getting 15%. So,
Mm.
and people will be more motivated to kind of get involved because they know they are less nervous about what it is they're getting into. So the earlier you can get an agreement in place, that's going to be the best course of action.
And that's a wrap. That's a great wrap up. Thank you, Gamal. I want to thank you for being our special guest today at the
Mhm.
Anime Expo Lite. The panel is Understanding Your Right as an Artist. presented by Project Anime. I want to thank all the fans for being here with us. I want to thank the organizers. And see you all next time. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank
You
you,
take care.
sir. Appreciate it.